Welcome to this week's LinkedIn Live event. Today's topic is the sales framework for non-sales professionals, and this is the second in a mini-series of now what'll be 4 episodes. I landed on this framework based on years of experience and exposure to a variety of sales frameworks, methodologies, and processes, including the transition from in-person selling to online selling, and now we're in what appears to be a hybrid where those two are coming in together more and more. Now, for this series, I'm distinguishing between framework, methodology, and process, as the sales framework provides the overall structure and guiding principles for a sales team, encompassing both the sales methodology, the approach and strategies used to sell, and the sales process, the specific steps taken to move a lead through the sales funnel. With that in mind, I'm providing a framework that can work with any sales process. The steps of the in-person sales process are the same across a variety of versions of training and offers and sales disciplines. The Dale Carnegie sales course was a standard for many years, if not decades, and it had the sequence of attention, interest, desire, conviction, and close. Now, this may be familiar to you because you probably heard it as attention, interest, desire, and action. And that action would be the call to action. And this came into being around the turn of the century because of online sales. So I like to stay focused on that conviction step because it's where the emotions get involved. It often creates the urgency that we often need to keep the person from putting it off. Now, the reason I'm providing a specific framework for owners, leaders, and executives who also choose to sell is because our world is not like that of a traditional salesperson's experience. We all find ourselves selling to people who are not buyers, or at least not typical buyers. So the path may be lengthened, it may be more choppy, and it may seem to be circular sometimes. In addition, salespeople are often constrained to certain requirements. There are typically quotas which put pressure on selling right now. There's nothing wrong with the urgency. It's important, especially for the sales team. But the owner might be seeking to sell in a non-buying situation that may require more patience, maybe prioritizing the long-term relationship over a right-now sale. Think of someone deciding to have a custom home built, how iterative that process could be before they decide to put a deposit down. This is that feeling out process, and it puts it into a framework that can be used regardless of the length of your sales cycle. In last week's session, I laid the foundation with the focus on why it's essential for owners and leaders to look at human needs in the selling process and how it aligns with decision making. We talked about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we talked about the 6 human needs, and we talked about self-determination theory that brings it together into autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And the outcome is intrinsic motivation, meaning people getting that motivation from inside, from the act itself, rather than some extrinsic incentive or reward or connection. Now, today, we move from concept to execution in the first half of the in-person sales sequence. I'll start with pre-call preparation. So before you even get on a call or enter a conversation, your internal state, clarity, and preparation have to be in place. They determine how you show up. So it's your state, physiology, mindset, and energy that set the tone for success. I'll also talk about why practice is important. Now, it may seem like a no-brainer, but there's a perspective that I don't see covered very often in sales training as to why this practice is important. You may think of it as role-playing, but I'm going to make some distinctions as we get into the material. Once in the sales framework, we want to frame the call. Now, this is where you set the intention and create an environment where trust and credibility are established. It's more than just rapport. From the very beginning, you're building rapport, moving into know, like, and trust, and then connection, and then repeat. We're going to keep doing that because you have to move deeper and deeper into getting the emotional reasons why this person is going to buy. This is not a simple, hey, I like the picture on your wall, and then mirroring the prospect. It's taking control of the situation in a way that the prospect feels you're aligned with their interests, not because of some technique, but because you really are. And they feel it. From there, we'll get into the most important part of a sales framework, fact finding. Now, typically, and in my framework is one step, but I break it into two parts because selling is not telling, asking is, and selling is serving. And in order to serve, we have to know what the needs are, and that's why the fact finding is so important. So while you're working through the framework, you're also earning the right to ask deeper questions, more personal questions, entering into the person's private life, if you will. So we all have a public persona, we have a private persona, and then the one that's out of scope here is the secret persona. We don't need to get into that to make the kind of sales that we're talking about. But I think you have to get into the private persona because you have to tap into that level of emotion. If you're familiar with the quality vernacular, we talk about asking the question why 5 times. And if you've done that, you'll know that it's about 2.5, 3 questions into why that you are now at a place where these people have not thought about that before. And that's what you're looking for. The eyes may go back and forth. They'll kind of shift. They may flush a little bit because they're having to answer a question that they've never answered before. In real time, you're observing them recognize that this is very important. That's where you need to get, and you have to have the alignment with them. You have to have the at least implied permission to be able to get into that level of questioning. Next week, I'll get into the demonstration and moving past objections as we pull it all together into a sustainable framework. As you adopt additional sales skills, you'll be able to insert those into the framework because the framework is flexible and consistent with best practices. To wrap up, I'll add a fourth event in the series to deal with the internal game. We have to master the internal game if we're going to be effective in the external. And that gets into personal leadership and agency, which is essential for us to stay present, engaged, and being able to return to a growth mindset if we ever get knocked off course. And I mean returning to a growth mindset instantaneously. So we'll talk about some of that as we get into next week's event, but certainly when we get into mastering the internal game. Right, so let's jump into the framework. I'll lay this out as a roadmap, and that'll give us a track that we can run on. And I'm going to start with the pre-call process. And this is not rocket science. We know that when we have to do something, when we have to speak before an audience, whatever it is, we want to enter that situation with some preparation. We want to have the right mindset. And this is what I was talking about as a business owner. You could come from working on solving some major problem right into a sales situation. And when that happens, we don't want to bring that baggage from the prior situation in with us. So we have to have some way of getting ourselves in the right frame of mind or the right state. And I'm not going to tell you what state you need to be in, whatever state that is. But to get into that state, if you've looked at watched any of my content, you know I talk a lot about the subconscious and our neural pathways, etc., and conditioning. We can actually condition in the state that we want. You can Google Tony Robbins' Whoa Clap, and that Whoa Clap is a great example of how you can condition in the steps. So he takes this clap, yes, 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 and then with a big whoa, yes. And if you do that several times in a row, you can create this heightened state, right? This heightened energy level. You can also do it like after if you do intervals, maybe do some really hard intervals. If you like running, some sprints after some sprinting, or maybe actually called fartlicking, where you run up and down like on a trail. You run up and down hills and you do side hits, and it's energizing, right? Invigorating. And that point takes you to this state. And then what you do is a move. You put in a move, an anchor. And mine is yes. And it's very, very quick. But I did that by conditioning that high state and then yes. Conditioning, yes. And now if I have to step into a sales situation, no matter what I'm coming from, it's always going to be a yes. Now, we'll do that before I start speaking online. Yes. And what it does is it triggers that state. Now, you can also do that in an opportunistic way. You win an event. Maybe you're in some athletic thing and you win and you're happy about it. You can just keep reinforcing it, and then you can bring it on right away. The first time you use it, it may not happen. You may have to do a little bit more. You may have to jump around a little bit. But eventually you'll get to the point where it's just a quick yes, and you're ready to go into motion. And typically salespeople do that at the beginning of the day, and then they just carry it through. But as a business owner who's wearing different hats, I bring that out. The next one is physiology. Now we all know that we've all seen the numbers that say 7% of communication is words, 38% is the nonverbal cues, etc., and then 55% is physiology. So it's very important. But what people might miss is that physiology can set us up for fight or flight. In other words, it can prime us to be more susceptible to a stress event, which means your threshold for stepping into fight or flight is less. If you consider that we're making, we're probably running through 30,000 stimulus response cycles a day. And if you're not careful and you're dropping, you're carrying some baggage from prior situations and you're dropping your state, you're dropping your physiology, just by having a slumping, defeated physiology, you're triggering the beginning of that cortisol process where it's essentially a stress response. So physiology is important, and make sure you carry that, even if you don't feel like it. And, they've said, try to feel depressed and have on a smile. And so we've heard about the examples, but people don't think about that. And this, by the way, is why I say practice is very important. It's a little side trip from this diagram I'm doing right now. Salespeople typically do not like role playing. It's just whatever it is. I've never seen a group of salespeople who jump in and, hey, I love role playing, but it's something that works. What's interesting is the big move is not from the role playing and interacting. The big move is actually from practicing the speaking. In other words, you can get a big portion of that done just by practicing on your own, as long as you're verbalizing and using the tonality. What we're doing is the same thing that a sports team does when they do drills. Those drills, it's not about muscle memory, it's nervous system memory. Think about it. It's the neural pathway that triggers the muscle to do the thing. And when it comes to speaking, we're conditioning the neural pathway to get us to say the words the way that we want to say them and then get used to it. An example of deep practice, and I do recommend people practice the opening. 100% practice the opening. You can time it. Now, the way deep practice works, one way you can do it is you can time yourself. Let's say you speak it 2 times in a row and you want to land on an exact time. By doing that kind of deep practice, adding another element, say focusing on landing at that exact time of saying it 2 times in a row with perfection, that deep practice causes the neural pathway, the neurons, to wrap with myelin. I mentioned that last week, and that myelin makes them fire faster and with more accuracy and with more strength, which is basically what people call muscle memory. But we're using this because it has the same effect on our thoughts, our thinking, it has the same effect on our speaking. So physiology is much more important than just, hey, let me get into the right posture. It's practicing so that we are also delivering the way we want to deliver. And then we have the energy. And this is related. Years ago, I read a book and it talked about high energy and low energy. And then it also had a dimension of positive energy and negative energy. And you can just think about a matrix in there where you have high negative energy, right, versus high positive energy versus low positive energy versus low negative energy. So clearly, we want to be in a high positive energy state. But there might be times where low positive energy is more appropriate. When you're doing some fact finding and you're helping the person with introspection, there might be a need to back off a little bit and let them wrestle with it internally. You don't want to be, the typical salesperson, like high energy coming at them if they need to process. And that's how you get into the deeper needs, by letting them work through it and wrestle with it. So just be aware of your energy. It doesn't always have to be high, but it should be positive and it should be appropriate. And then watch out with letting negative energy slip in. And that's again why we do the anchor, because we want to anchor that positive energy, and then we can move it to high and low, but staying in the positive. And then we have mindset. Now, the way to do this, and I already talked about it a little bit with the anchor, is priming. You want to have certain cues for your own priming. we're being primed whether we think it or not, whether we like it or not. When you're online reading the sales letter, there's priming in there. What it's doing is tapping into our cognitive biases. Cognitive bias is a mental heuristic, just a shortcut. But those things cause a lot of problems for us because marketers use them and we end up doing things. Last week I talked about the 7 factors of unconscious influence. Marketers use them like authority, scarcity, reciprocity, and people just do the thing without even thinking about it. So it's a double-edged sword. But since we're being primed all the time, doesn't it make sense for us to take charge of our own priming and start doing that? And of course it does. So you want to look into priming. There's a great book on it, John Bargh, Bargh, Before You Know It. It's a great book on priming. And I talked about physiology. Let me just put an exclamation point behind that. He's done a lot of research. And what he did was he had subjects have a hot cup or a cold cup of liquid in the hand. One set was hot liquid, one set was cold liquid, one set was no liquid. When they had the hot liquid in their hand and then they were faced with a situation, again, you have controls, research is done, they were more compassionate. They had a more compassionate response than they did when there was nothing in their hand, and certainly more so than when there was something cold in their hand. When there was something cold in their hand, like carrying a cup of iced tea, iced with ice in it, they were less likely to have a compassionate response. That really got my attention, and for decades I paid attention to the cognitive biases, and I understood priming, but not at that level. And then I made the connection that that's because it's the neural pathways. We got 100 billion neurons. Each of those neurons interacts with thousands and thousands of other neurons. And when you do the permutations on that, you can see it's just the numbers off the charts. But those neurons, it's our nervous system. And so warmth is warmth. And that's not John Bargh speaking, that's me saying it. But warmth is warmth. And because that carries through to the other neural pathways and triggering and associations, that's the word I should say, associations, it causes the compassionate response. Really fascinating. It tells you how important priming is in the sales process or any kind of communication, leadership, etc. Priming is very important. Let's say that we have a framework, and then you could think of it as a roadmap. And on this roadmap, the first step that we have is the pre-call, which I just spoke about. That's making sure you're in the right state, reviewing the customer notes that you have. And this is going to be real important when you get into 2 and 3 sales calls later, because you always want to have that step of going back and looking at the notes. So we have the pre-call. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. And then we have the next one is the rapport. As I said, there's no rocket science here. Every sales presentation that you come across is going to have these steps of rapport and then fact finding. But in addition to the rapport step, we want to have an alignment step. We want to make sure we're aligned, and we want to make sure we're in the right conversation. So we confirm. What we're doing here is pre-qualifying. But rather than think of it as pre-qualifying yes or no, which I know there's sales managers who are very, very big on pre-qualifying to protect the salesperson's time. And then there are others who don't want to pre-qualify or qualify because they don't want to lose prospects. We all know people who look like they didn't want to buy and then they ended up becoming a buyer. So I get the two sides of that. But the way I use it here is that in this confirmation step, we're making a decision. We're making a choice on the fly very quickly. And this whole point can take 5 minutes. I don't think there needs to be a lot of time spent on rapport. If they know you're there to talk about the product or service, the small talk, most business owners don't need to do a lot of small talk anyway. Obviously, if they're socializers, they're going to carry that a little bit further. But you as the salesperson do not need to carry it. A great, hey, how's it going? What's the weather like for you? Or how's your day been? Or how's your week been? That quick question is enough to provide the quote-unquote small talk. Small talk is the price we pay for having relationships. So enough is enough. Once you do it, you've got enough. You check that box, so to speak. I'm not talking about relationship building here. I'm talking about a sales framework. But in that section with that information, you're making a choice. Do I continue? Because the next step will be fact finding. Do I continue? Because once you continue down that path, you're asking some questions that are going to lead to building on emotion, and that's going to feed what comes out in the sales demonstration. You're basically building your presentation real time by asking these questions. The other thing that you may end up doing is delay and set follow-up. So in this case, if there's alignment and they confirm that this is the right conversation, but they're kind of busy or they're not really ready to talk about it or they're preoccupied, we may want to schedule a formal day in the future, especially as a business owner. Let's say you're networking and you do this step. You probably don't want to do the fact finding at that time. So this would be a good time to schedule something out into the future. This is one of the things that makes a owner sales call different than a salesperson sales call, because it might be something that's impromptu and then you're turning it into a sales call. So delay and schedule next week. But even if you have an appointment, even if you had a Zoom appointment or whatever, and you're on Zoom and you do how's your week going, and they say it's been hectic, I've got this going on and this fire and that thing and this thing going on, maybe asking, so let me just ask you a question, and I'm just curious. If there was a solution that met all of your needs, would you consider yourself in market, or is this something that you'd be looking way out into the future? All you're doing is getting a sense of, do you schedule something next week or do you delay and revisit? I'm big on this because I'll go back to using canned sales presentations. And canned sales presentations, and it's well designed. It's been tested and proven. It has leverages all the heuristics. It primes and primes and primes. When you use that kind of a presentation, and if you ever bought a timeshare, or someone sold you a vacuum cleaner in your home, or you bought some fire alarm, something like that, when you can sit through that entire presentation, your conviction is so high. It's very similar to if you ever find yourself reading one of those sales letters online, and it's like the more you read, then you find yourself wondering what's the price going to be, and wow, I really want this. And you even start thinking in your mind the price range that you might be a buyer, and it's literally priming you. Well, that's what good sales presentations do, and that's what this framework is doing. This framework is designed to put you in charge of building that kind of a presentation on the fly for yourself. This is why this step to me is very important, because I don't want to embark on that emotional journey, because you don't get to do it again. That fact finding gets into some deep thinking for the person, emotional stuff, and you're probably not going to be able to do it again if you do it now and they're not ready to buy. So we have hard stops. It doesn't mean you can't keep going, but you want to make sure you do a hard stop and a transition before you get into fact finding. Now, once you're into fact finding, we have part 1 and part 2 before we get into the next hard stop and transition. We've all heard that when you're starting the sales process, you want to use open-ended questions. But we don't want to just keep asking open-ended questions thinking the person is going to say, you know what, I'm ready to buy. What you want to do is, you are working through this funnel, and not to be confused with the sales funnel, the online selling funnel, but the concept is not that different. You're starting with a very broad base of open-ended questions. If you think of it like this, we have our open-ended questions, and those open-ended questions go from lifestyle, what's going on in their life, to service related or product related. And you want to do that fairly quickly. You may, like I said, asking how's your week going, depending on whether it's the beginning of the week or the latter. That could be your question. And that could be your one lifestyle open-ended question. From there, you want to start getting into, so last time we talked, or I saw that you did, whatever your segue is that still something that's important to you? Or did I read that right, that this is something that you're thinking about? Now, that's sort of a yes or no question, right? But it could also be an open-ended question. What are some of the things that are coming up to the top of your list when you think about this space? That's an open-ended question that gets you into the starting towards the right fact-finding. The next thing I want to do, though, is either-or questions. I think one of the challenges is that people get lost in rapport. They just keep going for more and more and more rapport. You're going to be building rapport across the entire roadmap. You're going to go from rapport to know, like, and trust to connection and repeat. So this is not, you don't want to drown in rapport land right here. You want to keep building rapport by asking questions, listening to the answer,